We at the Perth USAsia Centre, like everybody in Australia, are following the US presidential elections very closely. It really has implications for every program we run, every bit of research we do for Australia's national interest, for our international interest, not just for the United States, for the world. And we're so fortunate to have as the chairman of our board of directors, the Honourable Kim Beazley, former Minister of Defence, former Deputy Prime Minister, former Leader of the Opposition, and for the case of this conversation today, former Australian ambassador to the United States, a man who knows far more about the U.S. Civil War than I've ever known, and actually far more about American politics than most American political leaders today. So we're looking forward to a series of monthly conversations with you, looking at the month that just passed and the month ahead, and delighted to have you with us. And I just kind of want to start with that. You watched this closely. We ended up talking about it a lot. But what has happened over the last 4 or 5 weeks in U.S. presidential politics that have caught your attention? Do you think that are going to be important come November, or that our audience should be paying closer attention to?
Well, I'm definitely going to go and answer all of that, or try to answer it, because I know you can answer them better than me. So it's great to have a to and fro with you here. But just as a scene setter, we need to comprehend one thing, and I used to boast about it when I was in the United States. We in this country are more interested in US politics than Americans are. And I have statistical evidence. Pew Research did before the it was before the 2012 election actually, about amongst loads of countries, including the US and Australia, are you interested in American politics? In the United States, the figure was 83%. 83% of Americans said they were interested in American politics. 84% of Australians said they were interested in American politics. So we are fascinated with it for many reasons, partly as theatre, but more specifically as our survival. Because how the US tracks is critically important to this country, our sovereignty, our survival. So we have got a very big stake in this outcome. You'd have to say, though, I think over the last few weeks, if you're looking back and trying to identify something which occurred which may still resonate in November, it would have to be Trump's trial. And the fact that he was convicted, so he is now a convicted felon, he is a criminal. Now, many people have known that for a while, but this is the first time a court has said he is. So that's important. However, that is not necessarily an immediately influential thing. In fact, it rallied his supporters when he got convicted. However, the polls are tipping a little. And it's something like that is a slow burn. I mean, something like the Twin Towers coming down is a fast burn. That burned me. But the slow burn is a conviction like this. Because most Americans are respectable people, and they do take these things seriously. So there on Trump is this: an anchor was thrown out, and the anchor is now dragging. So I think that if you want to take out this month to the debate in a couple of days' time, this would have to be, I think, the most significant thing that's happened in politics.
Absolutely, and I think we're going to be talking about it for the next 4 months as well, just because I love your analogy, anchor dragging as we face further consequences of those 34 guilty verdicts.
Yes.
And obviously an ongoing process on several other charges in that process. For me, the development is one that people had long since stopped paying attention to, and that was in the primary elections. In order to win the Republican primary itself and to be the nominee, Donald Trump only had to win about 1,215 elections. Yeah. He has already amassed 2,200. But in that process, even though the conclusion was foregone, even we've known for a long time that Donald Trump was going to be the nominee, it seemed like the story was over. But the final Republican primaries didn't take place until the early June 4th, and I think Montana, New Mexico, and others. And I went back there and looked at the data. In the state of New Mexico, about 6% of the electorate voted for Nikki Haley. In some other states where she wasn't on the ballot, you still had about 9% that voted for a generic candidate without him named. In other states back in May, like Maryland, almost 22% voted for Nikki Haley, even though that she pulled out months ago. And so what that tells to me, in a deeply divided U.S. electorate, there remain a core of Republican Party voters who are willing to get up on their own volition and go to the polls and vote, who are still not yet willing to vote for Donald Trump. And so that's one of those that's going to be a slow burn for me too, to see what those, not never Trump Republicans, and they've been gone for a long period of time, but people who presumably voted for him in 2016 and in 2020, and whether it's because of the events of January 6th or because of this criminal conviction, whatever, who are not willing to vote for him today and yet are still going out to primary polls. And so that's something that I'm going to be watching, and that we saw the last vestiges of it in June. Well, let's move and look forward, because a lot's coming up. We're still today on the 25th of June. In 2 days' time, or 3 days' time in Australia, we'll have the first debate. On July 11th, we've got the sentencing from Donald Trump's 34 guilty verdicts in New York. And then we've got the Republican National Convention taking place from the 15th to the 18th of July. That's a pretty busy calendar for the next couple of weeks. What are you watching going forward? And again, let's try not to go to November. Let's focus in July.
I am sitting here riveted with fear. Not rational fear, but I'm worried about the debate. It's sort of... I notice that Trump is now trying to build Biden up. They've spent ages trying to say this guy is the walking dead. He has absolutely no neurons left. He can't walk a straight line and all the rest of it. And now suddenly, according to the Republicans, Biden has become a man of genius. One of the most formidable debaters the United States has ever seen. I think he's a pretty formidable debater too, but they haven't been saying that. And so you've got them trying to build him up, because the settings for the debate are not with Trump. The way he heckled Biden in the debates last time round, well, his mic gets turned off this time. The way he plays to an audience of morons, that can't be this time either, because all morons are out of the room, except one perhaps. And the consequence of that is that it's not a Trump theatre. Now, he will still heckle and interject. Doesn't matter if your mic's switched off. Biden's is switched on, and they're still sensitive enough to be able to pick up somebody else's commentary, but it won't be so much in Biden's face, in his ear. So hopefully that all works out well. Or the cynics might say, or else they hope it goes extremely badly and Biden decides to give it a miss and you go to an open convention, which at some point of time would be an interesting thing to discuss, what might be the consequences of that. But whichever way this goes, it is going to be influential.
So I think we can talk about the Democratic convention in our next conversation. But for now, I think you're right to focus on the debate. More so than sporting contests or anything else, debates are a game of expectations.
Yes.
And I think you're right to focus on efforts to kind of reset those expectations after a party has spent so long focusing on it. One way or the other is probably not going to be the pinnacle of cogent and well-articulated debates. One way or the other, whether it is current President Biden or former Vice President Biden that wins this election, the United States will have its oldest president ever. Former President Trump is only just a few years younger than President Biden, and so those consequences are there. I'm really interested in the convention going forward because there's a potential that Donald Trump could be sentenced to jail. Yeah. So already we've heard from the Republican National Committee that they've been exploring the contingencies about how do you hold the convention if your candidate has actually been sentenced to jail. Now, again, there's a full spectrum of opinion as to whether that'll happen, just like there was a full spectrum of opinion as to whether or not he'd be convicted. I'm curious as your views about the sentencing itself and then the upcoming convention.
Well, my bet would be a suspended sentence. That you get 3 or 4 years suspended. And that's bad. That's not a good thing to happen to you. But I don't think the judge would be of a mind to put him in jail, which we deserve, though that would be. I've never seen a defendant get away with what he got away with, not just in the United States, but here or anywhere else. And so he tried to make a mockery of the court. Talk about contempt of court. This has to be the most full-blown example of contempt in the judicial systems of the democratic world that he's got away with. But I think he'll get away with it to the extent that he gets a suspended sentence. But a suspended sentence is fine. That's just as good in terms of being damaging for him.
I think a good way to wrap up the point in time we're in today, so end of June, beginning of July, is to recognize that it's very easy to fall into typical election analysis, which is a horse race. Who's doing what? What's likely to happen? What happens in the convention? And yet, looking back at the conversation we've just had, it is completely unprecedented that we're talking about a presidential candidate who's been convicted, and that there will be a sentencing 4 days before the nomination itself, and that we're looking at what those longer-term consequences of those legal actions are in a context where, the Republican Party candidate, is still facing even more serious legal charges around his handling of classified documents, around his interference in the election, around the events of January 6th that are still coming down the pike. And so it's important for us to do our analysis, but also recognize how completely beyond the pale this date and time is. And it's, I think, in that context that the events of this past month, June, are interesting. The events of July will be more interesting still, and we're still 5 months out from the actual election itself.
Indeed. And if Biden can hold on and win, Trump will definitely go to jail. This is what's hanging over him. And I think he understands that absolutely. The stakes for which he is now playing couldn't be higher. There must be in the Trump household a real fear of the next 5 months, because I think there's a good chance Biden will win, and if he does, won't have anything to do with Biden, but Trump will go to jail.
Well, as you said at the outset, the stakes for Trump are high, but so are the stakes for the United States, for Australia, and I would argue the world. So thank you, Kim. I look forward to next month. Well, terrific. We'll see what happened.